Welcome back to my sharing of life in abundance as proclaimed by a universal Christ. In the last segment, I shared some of my thoughts about the Incarnation and how it opened to me a much broader understanding of Christ than merely the events surrounding the earthly life of Jesus. I began to understand something of St. Paul's view of the Christ as being a universal event which alters the way we look at creation and at life itself. In the prologue of John's Gospel, we read, "And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us." And putting that in the context of Psalm 148, in which creation itself gives praises to the Lord, I began to see something which I had not noticed before. Previously, I had just seen God as the creator and all material things which he created as being separate from him. But I now began to see that somehow something of the creator actually lives within everything that exists. God's DNA, which is love, is imprinted in everything, and we need to look no further. But, however, we do need to look more deeply. Unfortunately, the dualistic mindset that most of us operate out of has blunted this vision of God's omnipresence. We see this in contrast like spirit versus the flesh, sacred versus the secular, and the natural versus the supernatural. To my mind, this makes God smaller in our understanding by eliminating him from those areas of life which we deem below the nature of the divine. However, the bodily resurrection of Jesus became a reminder to me that all things material has been blessed by God and is therefore sacred. I recall when we were first given permission to receive communion in the hand rather than on the tongue, how some Catholics thought that it was almost sacrilegious. It was then pointed out that it was the same creator who created the hand as well as the tongue. Maybe Christian spirituality has become too otherworldly, and we have not yet fully understood what incarnation implies in our daily living. The Lakota people, among other indigenous First Nations, often have a doxology, an ending to their prayer. Mitikuya Oyasin, all my relations, which expresses their relationship not only to other human beings, but also to birds, plants, animals, insects, and indeed all creation. They were expressing a spirituality reflecting that of a St. Francis of Assisi, whose famous Ode to Brother Sun was written some 800 years ago. His spiritual legacy is honored not only in the Catholic Church, but is embraced by Christians and non-Christians of all cultures. They're recognizing the spirit of the Creator residing in all things. You know, a material and fleshly existence is apparently what God intended for us, and its perfection is what Jesus modeled so perfectly for us. Our earthly life is the environment in which we live and move and have our very being, and it is there that we strive for wholeness, that we become creatures which God desires us to be. It's like a loving parent desiring that their child reach their full potential as a human being. Unfortunately, much popular Christian thought has reduced the meaning of earthly life as a kind of an evacuation plan in order to get to heaven. This does not take the Incarnation very seriously. And it kind of leaves us off the hook to be good stewards of the earth and leads us to plunder our environment and exploit our fellow human beings. Now, this is not to deny a life beyond our earthly existence. However, Jesus didn't promise us heavenly wings, but rather that we might have life and have it abundantly. The letter to the Hebrews is a reminder that we, as flesh and blood human beings, have a relationship to the Creator that not even the angels have. God never said to any angel, "You are my son, today I've become your father." So if the bodily resurrection of the risen Christ is a statement of the sacredness of the material universe, then we have to take seriously the word flesh as the abode of the sacred. Now, unfortunately, the term flesh has often taken on the connotation that all things material are somehow inherently evil, or at best, contrary to those things that are spiritual. However, when St. Paul uses the term, it's usually more in regard to our egos and our tendency to be self-focused. I think it was the Greek philosopher Plato was the first in the Western world who differentiated the spiritual from the material. And this thinking has unfortunately infiltrated Christian thought ever since. Early in its history, the Church had to defend itself against a Persian philosophy called Manichaeism, which professed such a dualistic view. Although the Church formally rejected this teaching, it has reared its head in various forms over the centuries, even from some Christian pulpits. Now, these types of dualistic teachings have tried to undermine the basic sanctity of God's creation to the degree that the biggest lie that we have to debunk is that holiness is incompatible with any earthly reality. We relegate holiness to some extraterrestrial state, or a Mother Teresa or some medieval saint. We convince ourselves that it's not possible for us. Matthew Kelly calls this the biggest lie in Christianity. The presumption is that holiness implies perfection. However, one only has to read genuine and detailed lives of the saints to find out this is certainly not the case. What holiness does imply is acting on an awareness that each and every moment presents an opportunity to put aside our own agendas and desires in order to acknowledge and address the needs outside of ourselves. Kelly refers to these opportunities as holy moments. And they are occasions in which we can do as Jesus directs us, and thus give evidence that the Incarnation is at work in our world. Ultimately, holiness is indeed possible and accessible in our everyday lives. It's evident in the common courtesy practiced by ordinary people in ordinary circumstances. Now, we may not always refer to it in those terms, but nonetheless, it is a sign that further underlies the spirit of incarnation. In our next segment, I will examine what we have to overcome to accept a Catholic or more universal understanding of Christ. I hope you'll join us.